Hi class, I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about character-driven stories because we had an example of that in the last story that you read and wrote about for Module 3, How Far She Went. And I wanted you to point out when the climax of that story was. And many of you chose to write about the chase and the gun and the motorcycle rides, when in reality, in a character-driven story, the climax occurs when the protagonist begins to think or act or feel differently than he or she did at the beginning of the story. So I want you to use that information and consider when you think the main character changes in the story that we're about to read together. And also I want you to think about the importance of the title, what the theme might be, and to pick out a few examples of imagery. The story is called Fish Cheeks, and you have a PDF version of it on our Moodle course site. So if you'd like to, let's get started. We'll read together. Fish Cheeks. I fell in love with the minister's son the winter I turned 14. He was not Chinese, but as white as Mary in the manger. For Christmas I prayed for this blonde-haired boy Robert and a slim, new American nose. When I found out that my parents had invited the minister's family over for Christmas Eve dinner, I cried, what would Robert think of our shabby Chinese Christmas? What would he think of our noisy Chinese relatives who lacked proper American manners? What terrible disappointment would he feel upon seeing not a roasted turkey and sweet potatoes, but Chinese food? On Christmas Eve, I saw that my mother had outdone herself in creating a strange menu. She was pulling black veins out of the backs of fleshy prawns. The kitchen was littered with appalling mounds of raw food, a slimy rock cod with bulging eyes that pleaded not to be thrown into a pan of hot oil, tofu, which looked like stacked wedges of rubbery white sponges. A bowl soaking dried fungus back to life, a plate of squid, their backs crisscrossed with knife markings so they resembled bicycle tires. And then they arrived, the minister's family and all my relatives, in a clamor of doorbells and rumpled Christmas packages. Robert grunted hello, and I pretended he was not worthy of existence. Dinner threw me deeper into despair. My relatives licked the ends of their chopsticks and reached across the table, dipping them into the dozen or so plates of food. Robert and his family waited patiently for platters to be passed to them. My relatives murmured with pleasure when my mother brought out the whole steamed fish. Robert grimaced. Then my father poked his chopsticks just below the fish eye and plucked out the soft meat. Amy, your favorite, he said, offering me the tender fish cheek. I wanted to disappear. At the end of the meal, my father leaned back and belched loudly, thanking my mother for her fine cooking. It's a polite Chinese custom to show you are satisfied, explained my father to our astonished guest. Robert was looking down at his plate with a reddened face. The minister managed to muster up a quiet burp. I was stunned into silence for the rest of the night. After everyone had gone, my mother said to me, "You want to be the same as American girls on the outside." She handed me an early gift. It was a mini skirt in beige tweed. "But inside, you must always be Chinese. You must be proud you are different. Your only shame is to have shame." And even though I didn't agree with her then, I knew that she understood how much I had suffered during the evening's dinner. It wasn't until many years later, long after I had gotten over my crush on Robert, that I was able to fully appreciate her lesson and the true purpose behind our particular menu. For Christmas Eve that year, she had chosen all my favorite foods. So now that you get to the end of the story, you see why Amy Tan chose that particular title for it. You also probably have some images of the food on the table, the sound of the minister's quiet burp versus the belch, and the double dipping with the chopsticks, and probably the way that the tofu looked and the fish and the squid. But most importantly, I want you to recognize that the main point of the story, the point at which the character has somewhat of a revelation, is at the end of the story when her mom gives her the Christmas gift. And we see that theme of struggling with the outside versus the inside, and the fact that she has her Chinese culture and her American culture. We also see another theme of communication between her and her mother. And we notice that even though she doesn't see it at that very moment, she realizes later on that her mom was loving her in the way that mothers do. And she's able to tell the story, a good narrative, and give us a reason for remembering the story. So I hope you enjoy it and can see what I mean by some of the major themes and how her childhood affects the topics of her stories. And I will see you next time when we continue to discuss some more modern American writers. Have a great day.